Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to this online session in which we are going to highlight some of the issues around why and how to develop critical digital health pedagogies for teachers of physical education. We got an excellent panel here to discuss some of the key issues we have developed through the last nearly 2 years through our Digi Health PE project, which is an interdisciplinary, international, and collaborative research approach to developing critical digital health pedagogies for PE teachers. This is a seed funding project funded by Una Europa, and we are a team comprising academic from Una Europa Partners Organization, partners universities, from the University of Edinburgh. Shirley Gray and Sarah Isaac are here. From the University of Helsinki, we have Christina Kumpulinen. Also from Bath University, Emma Rich is going to be with us, and the University of Bologna also participate with Antonio Machuro, who is not here today. We are very grateful to Una Europa, and before starting with our panel discussion and the presentation of the project, I would like to welcome Melissa Clements. She's the management assistant of the European Seed Funding Project, and I've been in contact with her to manage the project in this pandemic situation, introducing sometimes changes on the go, because we would like to take the better advantage of this project. And I would like to thank you, Melissa, very much for your support. And please, could you share with us some ideas about this initiative from the Una Europa organization?
Yes, of course. Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm also happy to welcome all the participants on behalf of the Central Office of Una Europa in Brussels. I'm here to give a brief introduction on Una Europa and the seed funding initiative. So very top line, our ultimate goal is to enhance the quality of education and research to make a meaningful contribution to society. We are a truly European inter-university environment where outstanding research is continuously linked to transnational learning, innovative critical thinking. So we were among the first selected European universities at EU level, and we aim to fulfill our claim to becoming the leading sustainable research-intensive university that is open and inclusive. In 2019, when we started, we also created a legal entity for the sustainability of our alliance. And we aim to have impact across all 3 interconnected levels of the university mission: education, research, and service to society. We started with 8, but in January, we were happy to welcome Leiden University to the family. The other universities are University of Berlin, Bologna, Edinburgh, Helsinki, Jagiellonian University in Krakow, so Leiden, also KU Leuven, Complutense in Madrid, and the Paris 1 Sorbonne. So the seed funding initiative is one of these initiatives organized at the legal entity level of the association. It's a yearly call, open to all academic disciplines and completely bottom up. We have about 150,000 euros reserved each year from the Una Europa budget. And each project has been receiving between 11 and 19,000, depending on the number of partners. Currently, we have 39 projects running. You can see an overview of the calls. The last one is a bit special. So we received funding from NAWA, the Agency for Academic Exchange in Poland, for this. And we collaborate with JU on the call. It was directed at young researchers and for projects on digital technologies for society. And we have 6 projects selected here. Future plans for seed funding, we're working on a new academic call for this year still. This will revolve around an academic fellowship. And the main goal will be to consolidate the academic collaboration in our 5 focus areas. It will be launched early this summer, but it's still to be finalized and announced. Also aim to have a call for professional staff next year. And something new and exciting is that we are working on a database of all seed funding projects that can be checked at our website. This will be online next week. And your project would then look like this. The top line information and a one-pager with the abstract and some more information. And this for all the projects. So I'm happy to open the webinar, and I hope for some very interesting discussions. Thank you very much.
Now I'm going to introduce briefly the UNEUropa project, but first I would like, Anna, please, could you send again the link to Emma Rich? She can't enter into the session. I don't know, she's having problems and she's waiting again for the link. Thank you. Okay, so briefly, our UNEUropa project is an exploratory research to co-develop and evaluate innovative pedagogical ideas relating to critical digital health in physical education. As we all know, in our digital world, the nature of learning about health is increasingly complex, sometimes exposing young people to benefits, but also to emerging risks. And also these technologies are being used in schools, and sometimes they are being used in a non-problematic way. So I think we think that all this poses challenges to our understanding of how to best equip teachers, and specifically physical education teachers, with critical and transformative teaching approaches to challenge the ways in which young people engage with digital health technologies. And considering this aim, through this UNEUropa seed funding project, we designed and delivered a professional development workshop with in-service PE teachers in 2 UNEUropa partners universities, the University Complutense of Madrid and also in Edinburgh. And we have evaluated this process by gathering data related to the participant experiences, learnings, and impact on their professional practice. So our idea is to share with you how we have developed all this project, how we designed the workshop, and why we think this approach, critical digital health pedagogies, could be useful and transformative for physical education. So we are going to organize our panel discussion around the following key issues. First, why do we need to be critical with digital health technologies? How do we adopt in our project a critical approach? Second thing is to explain how do we develop this approach with PE teachers in our project. And considering our UNEUropa project and the results, we would like to reflect about what could be the future direction for critical digital health pedagogies in the schools. So towards the end of the session, we will give you the opportunity to put some questions that may be of interest or relevance to you. And you might even have some of your own ideas around this area, and it would be excellent if you could share this with us. Before we start with some of the discussions around these areas, I would like to invite all the panel members now just to say a little bit about who they are, and also to speak a little bit about their research background and the expertise they brought to the project. So, hi, Emma. Thank you, you are here. So let's start, for example, just beginning in my screen. Shirley, you are the first. Could you please introduce you and say something about your background.
Yeah, thanks, Maria-Jose, and thanks, Melissa, as well. Okay, so my name is Shirley Gray, and I'm a senior lecturer in physical education at the University of Edinburgh. And I come into this project not really with a background in digital health or digital health learning, but really with an interest in how teachers teach, particularly critical pedagogies, so how they work around issues in PE related to things like gender and health, so how health is understood and what that means for their practices, what it means in terms of, how do we challenge inequalities around these areas. So that's kind of my background, is around pedagogy and critical pedagogies especially. But then I was Sarah's PhD supervisor, and Sarah kind of through her ethnographic work got drawn into this digital health world and kind of somehow dragged me in with her. And I guess together we've become quite interested in this concept of digital health learning, so how young people engage with digital technology, including social media, to learn about health and what that means for them, their sense of identity, and I guess what we as PE teachers can learn from that and how we might support young people through that learning. So that's a bit about me.
Thank you, Shirley. Sarah, could you please continue with your presentation?
Hiya. So my name is Sarah McIsaac. I'm a lecturer at University of Edinburgh. I work closely with Shirley, so hopefully I won't repeat too much of what she said. But my interest in this area did arise from my PhD research, where I was in a school trying to understand the kind of contemporary body-related culture in amongst pupils. And from that, they kind of brought me to look very much at the role that social media played in forming their perceptions of themselves and of others, and of how they negotiated power relations and learnt about health in the body. And from that, I became very interested in how teachers can support young people to engage with social media in kind of critical ways in relation to their bodies. But at the same time, I became quite frustrated myself as a young teacher as well, understanding what on earth that would look like in practice. And also as a PE teacher, and certainly based in Scotland, all of our PE is pretty much through the practical domain. And I found it quite frustrating trying to understand how I could help young people think critically, but through movement and through their body, because a lot of the recommendations that I would read about within literature were very much around kind of more focusing on the mind and discussions and group presentations, reflexive diaries, but I wanted to learn a bit more about how movement could be involved in that.
Thank you, Sarah. Emma, could you please continue?
Sure. Thank you, Maria-Jose, and thank you, Melissa. Apologies, I was a few minutes late. The irony of having a technical fail. So my name is Emma Rich, and I'm a professor in physical activity and health pedagogy at the University of Bath in England. And what that really means is most of my research looks at the intersection between learning about health from a sort of sociological perspective and where that learning takes place, so through education in both formal and informal settings. So my background was really in sociology of physical education, and then around the time of I guess what we might call Web 1.0, I began to be very interested in how particularly young people were learning through things like websites and chat rooms and community groups at that point. So wrote a book on the medicalization of cyberspace, as we then called it. Since then, much of my work has been focused around what you might call digital health education. So a couple of years ago, I led a project funded by the Wellcome Trust on young people and digital health, really looking at what young people were using and how that influenced their understandings of health and concepts of body and identity. I'm really excited to be here today with such a great team to work with, but to be able to share some of what we've been doing over the last couple of years. So really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Emma. Very interesting. Christina, could you please continue?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much. I would sincerely like to thank Maria Jose for organizing this wonderful panel, and thank you for all the people who are involved in organizing this event. My name is Christina Kumpulinen, and I work as a professor of education at the University of Helsinki in the Faculty of Educational Sciences. It has been an exciting journey to be involved in this project. My expertise rests heavily in understanding and generating knowledge how the digital world is impacting young people, their learning, education, and well-being. My research has been geared to understanding the digital literacy practices of young children and young population in Finland, in the Nordic countries and globally, how they use digital technologies, how also they develop their identities, and particularly I have been interested in the notion of transformative agency. So how the digital is being harnessed by young people for productive, transformative ends, be it learning, be it well-being, or impacting and participating in society. Naturally, at the same time, I'm very concerned, like any researcher or even a parent of young people, how the digital world is changing our life worlds and what are the critical elements. Are we aware of data surveillance, marketization, where we post, what kind of information we read? So I'm very interested in this kind of media literacy from the critical perspective. These are very important, and particularly in the context of health literacies as well, how they are being used and what consequences they have, both the positive but also the threats are part of my interest. I have just recently led a Nordic research network on digitalizing childhoods, funded by the Academy of Finland and some Nordic associations. And it has been a pleasure to integrate this knowledge into our work here. We are mapping the research field in this area in our UNA project, but also are very interested in kind of translating this knowledge, what it can mean for teacher education and teacher professional development in the area. Naturally, my field is a kind of a not only in physical education, rather across the curriculum. What does this mean, and how digital health literacies can be promoted throughout the curriculum is something that I'm very interested in. So this is a brief introduction, and lovely to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. I think your background and expertise just to contribute for this project, it's amazing. And I think the development of all the project is taking advantage of all this interesting and fruitful background that all you have in the area of digital and health sociology, physical education, and all with these perspectives of critical pedagogy. So let's move on now to our key questions. So first, we would like to explore the idea of why do we need to be critical with digital health technologies, and how we can adopt this critical approach. So any ideas? Who would like to start this idea related to what do we mean by this critical understanding around digital technologies? I'm
happy to respond to that one, Maria Jose.
Thank you, Emma.
Okay. So yeah, I guess the first thing is what do we really mean by the word critical? And And our first sort of point of departure, I guess, is that this doesn't mean we're necessarily saying that digital technologies are bad or inherently negative. It means that through our project, we've come at the use of digital technologies in teaching and learning with I guess a different set of questions. And the idea of being critical does vary across different fields. So we're bringing together insights from education, sociology, media studies, critical digital health. And I think, as Christina really nicely put this, we're interested in how or could these technologies potentially transform teaching and learning, and what is the relationship between that and wider society. And really this came about, this kind of critical perspective, from the early research on the digital tended to be either what we might call utopian or dystopian. This idea that technology is either inherently bad, it makes children sedentary or couch potatoes, and we're all engaging with technology and it brings about social ills. On the other hand, over the last sort of 10 years, we've seen a rapid development in the integration of digital health technologies in a very instrumental, and some argue neoliberal way. So very much about seeing technologies as this neutral thing that can improve health behaviors simply by giving people more knowledge and access to data. So as that's become increasingly integrated both within healthcare systems, but now what we might call educational technology or edtech, this raises, I think, some really interesting questions. So the critical part for us is connecting those technologies with the broader processes, and Christina mentioned some of these things like marketization, the governance of young people's bodies, datafication. So we know that an increasing amount of data is being collected on young people's learning, but also now their health. And we have a whole spectrum of digital devices and apps which collect all sorts of data, like weight, calories, all sorts of behavioral measures. And this is leading to something which is now quite recognized in the literature, which is datafication, and this term dataveillance. So that's using data to undertake forms of surveillance on young people. And I think the really interesting point for us and for teachers is the way that that data becomes actionable. So it's not neutral. We take that data and we do something with it. And it might be that we make a judgment on someone's health, or within education, it might be used to predict learning, or to make some kind of judgment about what we might see as innovative, creative, or even comparative data across schools. So there are examples of data being collected around children's weight using digital devices, and that being a metric that we then compare across different schools. So this increasing amount of data, I think, is one issue. And this raises all sorts of questions which we could springboard from here today in terms of governance, but also transformation. So the critical isn't just about saying this is Big Brother society. There are also lots of examples of innovation and creative practice, but we need to look at that in terms of the uptake of those technologies as pedagogical practice.
Thank you, Emma. I think this idea related to how our society is more and more data fight, and this problem related to surveillance, and also who honors all this data and who benefits from it. I think it's a question that we at the schools have to consider, because some teachers, I think, are using it without a lot of reflection about these flows of data and the power just that these data have. I don't know, Christina, if this area of research is something that you have considered with this idea of critical approach.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, what has changed drastically is the fact that in the past, I think we teachers, we kind of knew the worlds of the young people, and there was a particular type of knowledge that our curriculum was set for the teachers to deliver in different ways to our students. Now, because of the digital world, we don't really know all the knowledge bases that our young people are kind of learning and meeting in their everyday lives, and also because of this kind of personalizing the data that is brought towards young people, they experience different things. And I think this causes a lot of challenges for educators and teachers, because the world is so individualized and personalized, which is a good thing. But at the same time, what is the role of teachers and teaching, and how to navigate these different knowledge bases, value bases, information flow, and even datafication flow that this digital world allows us? As we have been saying, there are strengths and possibilities to support and create a better society and support everybody's learning and being. But at the same time, there are many new questions and issues that the digital world has brought forward. So I'm kind of puzzled also myself about the fact how different the world can look like for any individual nowadays, because of this diversity of different literacies and sources of knowledge that are available to us. And we don't really know that. We can no longer control that in any way. It's very blurry and difficult to grasp and handle. So there is a lot to think about our pedagogies and our way of kind of handling knowledge, and that what is available to young people.
Thank you very much, Christina. Very interesting. Okay, so I don't know, Sarah and Shirley, if you can say something to the discussion just related to, for example, what do we mean by critical, considering, for example, the approach we are using just to develop these pedagogies for PE teachers?
Well, I could say something. I think it builds on from what Emma and Christina were saying, and it is related to the project because it did inform our thinking a lot in the early days as we developed the project. And that was really just thinking about what is the role of the PE teacher, particularly in relation to teaching health or about health or for health, and the need to adopt a critical approach, because I personally don't think that it's our role as PE teachers to teach young people how to be healthy, because everyone's context, situation, culture, all these things influence how we understand health and how we engage in health-related practices. And then on top of that, obviously, you have the digital. I think it's our job as PE teachers to develop these critical thinking skills around health, to encourage young people to think about what health means to them in their context, and to question and to problematize. So I think that for me, this project and some of the thinking behind this project aligns with what I thought about health teaching anyway, in terms of our role as a PE teacher. As I say, I don't think our role as a PE teacher is to make claims about what young people need to do to be healthy or to look healthy. It's about helping young people to sort of critically explore some of these ideas and what they mean for them. And that was kind of our starting point for this project, you know, the discussions that Sarah and I have had about what health means, what health teaching means, what health teaching is for, and the role of a young person in their own health learning. And then, you know, obviously Sarah's work brought the digital into that. And I guess through the work we've done with teachers, we've really just tried to have these discussions with teachers. So what does health mean to them? What kind of health teaching do they engage in? What type of health practices do they engage in? And to begin to problematize some of those. And as I think Emma and Christina have alluded to, it's not about saying that, you know, what they're doing is bad or wrong. It's just about understanding it and then perhaps looking for alternatives. Alternatives that might be, for example, more meaningful, more socially just, more equitable. Yeah, so just looking for alternatives.
Thank you very much. Sarah.
Yeah, and just to add to what Shirley's saying and probably build a bit on what Christina was saying as well, when we're talking about how unique every young person's context is, how unique every teacher's context is, I think that quite an important, well, a hugely important part of our study has been this idea that as researchers, we are not here to tell teachers how we think they should enact these kind of critical digital health pedagogies, but rather to work with teachers, and ultimately our goal would be to work with young people in collaboration with their teachers, so that they can, you know, make sense of their context. You know, teachers who are seeing these young people day in and day out, who know them, you know, have built relationships with them. A huge part of our project has been this idea of collaboration and working together, and not necessarily coming up with a right way of doing it, or kind of this is how it should be done, because we've been looking at these multiple possibilities and how there's not necessarily one way of doing this at all. There's countless ways that this could be done, and you know, a lot of that will depend on the context that you're in and the problems that you're faced with and so on.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, very much. I think that it's very important that this idea of considering all the context in which teachers are just teaching at their schools, and considering all this social influence that circulates, for example, around social media and all these normative meanings and affects. So I don't know if somebody has any idea about how to be critical in relation to the normative effects that these digital technologies are promoting.
I suppose one thing that's really stood out in terms of what we found through the project has been the limitations, I suppose, of ways of thinking which underpin current literacy approaches within well-being, health and physical education curricula. So primarily they adopt a behaviour change model, and this goes back, I think, to Sarah's point around the role of using movement as a way to engage in the critical in a different way. So a good example of this is the number of young people that will tell us, I know that, for example, images in social media are photoshopped. So they have that level of kind of cognitive literacy or critique and awareness. But then they'll go on to tell us, but that doesn't stop me wanting to look like that. And that then shapes some of their health practices. So in some ways that can lead to obsessive or disaffected forms of physical activity or engagement with dietary practices. So that notion of criticality, which focuses on the affective, is about recognizing how deeply entangled and embodied young people's worlds are when they're digitally engaged. And I think the other challenge, particularly for teachers and for parents as well, or anyone with I guess a care or responsibility for young people, is that it's very, very difficult to opt out of digital worlds. So even if we help young people recognize the risks of certain social media environments, Fitspiration, social media influencers who are generating knowledge around health, there's so much to navigate, but it's very difficult for young people to be absent from those worlds. So through the project, we've also attempted to use movement and to use data and to think about the trajectories or the life that that data takes. It doesn't just stay in one place. To begin to think differently, I think, around that criticality, which really helps us focus on affect. So those deep connections that we have. A writer, Elsbin Probin, she talks about the goosebump effect, and that for me has always resonated, that sometimes when we hear or see something, it produces that affective response. So that's a different way of thinking about literacy that moves us beyond the kind of existing media literacy models that we've seen around, for example, body image programs, which have been very helpful. But I think in this digitally mediated, complex, embodied world, we perhaps need a different understanding of criticality.
Thank you very much, Emma. So I think that now it could be useful just to explain how we developed this approach in our project. So what step we followed and how we developed this training, these workshops that we created for the PE teachers. And also we are working now in creating a guide for aim at PE teachers, just to have this understanding just for training. So let's explain how we develop this training for teachers, considering all these principles and how we manage through all this messy process, because it was a messy process, but I think we have learned quite a lot, and I think we are advancing in a very good way. So certainly, Sarah, maybe would you like to explain?
Yeah, I see Christina's got her hand up, so I wondered if Christina wanted to come in first just to say something off the back of Emma's.
Sorry, Christina.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, perhaps I was already thinking about Maria's question. What I wanted to bring up in this connection is that since we understand how unique, cultural and situated the digital health practices are for many young people and also for teachers, I think our model to develop pedagogies for critical digital health pedagogies is very much geared on co-participatory design and development. So we have seen that approach being very kind of important in really understanding the participants' viewpoints, perspectives, knowledge, worries. And this has then been one of the starting points in creating or actually co-creating pedagogies, contents, practices that could be used in physical education and even across the curriculum. We have found this approach very important in this complex world, since nobody has the knowledge to start with only. We have tried to integrate also current research knowledge. So researchers like us, we are not silent partners, but we will also equally bring in our knowledge for the development and design work when thinking about the pedagogies that are relevant in today's world in relation to critical digital health pedagogies. So this co-design, listening and appreciating the voices of everybody and harnessing that in our work has been an important starting point and principle. And it may end up being actually one of our outcomes, because it may be that each context and situation is difficult and different. So the processes, how you develop pedagogies, become even more important than particular solution. So I think that is also what we are emphasizing and have learned. So modeling these processes, how to develop relevant pedagogies, is as important as one solution. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. I can just try to briefly describe where we started at then. I think we've kind of covered some of the main starting points in that we had an interest and a background and we sort of valued critical approaches and critical thinking. And we thought in terms of trying to think differently and challenge certain ways of working with digital technology for health, that would be a useful approach. So we knew that what we wanted to do was going to be critical or critical in nature. As Sarah and Emma have already alluded to, we also wanted to implicate the body in this. And actually, the more I learn about this process and some of these ideas, the more I think that critical thinking and embodied learning are two in the same thing. You know, when we think critically, it does involve our body. It gives us that, as Emma alluded to there, that sort of goosebump effect. We become emotionally involved in the issue, and that's embodied learning. That has an effect on us, and I think we saw that as a good thing. And interestingly, around about the time, so we had these three principles to start off with, in that the approaches we use with teachers should be critical, they should be embodied, and they should be working with teachers in this kind of participatory, using a participatory approach. But then as we were developing these ideas and we were thinking about doing something different, trying to move people to not just think critically, but to be critical, we started to do, well, certainly Sarah and I, and probably Maria Jose, I think Christina and Emma were a bit further down the line, but we started to do some reading around new materialism and saw that as a really useful theory to encourage us to think differently and to see the world differently, to sort of cast the net wider and look at a range of things, human and non-human, that might affect us and affect how we work with digital technology, how we work with teachers, how we work with each other. So that certainly encouraged us to think about this notion of, we're not doing research on teachers or on young people or on digital technology. They're all part of this assemblage. We're working together to kind of see what comes out of it, to see what that can do. And that idea, if we have this assemblage made up of things, then we can also disassemble and reassemble, so that can change. And just looking for what are the things that might result in change and doing things differently. So there was quite a few things happening, as Maria Jose alluded to. It was quite messy and complicated. We had these original principles that we wanted to work with based on our own interest and experience, but then we had these new ideas coming in through theory, through the concept of new materialism, and all of these things together. So from the interaction of all these things together, almost 5 principles emerged, and they were the work we would do with teachers and the work that we would encourage them to do with young people would be critical, embodied, participatory or collaborative, that we would be working with as part of this assemblage, and that also we should be open to difference, and that there would be no right or no wrong, but that we should expect the unexpected and be open to multiple different solutions to some of the ideas and problems that we were setting. So we took some of these ideas and we did some pilot work with some undergraduate PE teachers, and then Maria Jose took the ideas and did some work with teachers in Spain, And then Sarah and myself have done some work with teachers here in Edinburgh to introduce these principles to them, to work with them to think about ways in which we might develop activities that would be underpinned by those principles, and really just work through, what does that do? What does that do to us? What does that do to what we know? What does that do to how we behave? And what might that do when we go back into schools? And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, a very big nutshell, where we are at the moment, I think, unless Sarah or Maria Jose or any of the other panel members want to contribute.
I think one of the key things in relation to the development of the workshop in Spain is, in relation to Edinburgh, is that we can see differences in relation to the kind of previous training in critical pedagogies that our PE teachers have. So in Spain, for example, it's a pity, but I think that PE teachers, secondary PE teachers, usually course the physical activity and sports science degree, and they are most focused on sports, or not in a very educative approach, I think. And maybe the training that they receive in their master studies are not very focused on the critical part. So I think it's also the technical approach that we have to training teachers, and also to approach knowledge that characterize our neoliberal universities, in which the teachers are just technocrats that apply knowledge and try to do this change try to consider teachers as professional developers of teaching experience from a critical way. It's something that it's very difficult to approach in a 3 hours workshop. Yeah. So one of the problems that we have in Spain is that the focus our teacher had in the workshop, if it was around digital technologies for health, with this instrumental view instead of teaching about health. So it's something that maybe Emma, you would like to develop a bit more, this different. And so I think this was the main cultural difference. And I think in Edinburgh, they have 4 years just focus on a degree of physical education, and this make a huge difference because you develop very well the critical approach. And here in Spain, some teachers sign up our workshop thinking that they will receive information about how to use apps or technological device, and it was not the idea, and some of them became very frustrated.
I think what we found certainly in Edinburgh was that a lot of the people that came to our workshop were like former students who'd done a 4-year physical education degree, and they were very used to asking these sorts of critical questions and thinking in that, and thinking in that way, and they were very on board with the workshop, and from the very start. And I think what they said they struggled with, and what I as well from the same sort of context have struggled with, and I've just mentioned it before, was they were very, they were used to asking these critical questions, but very much found it difficult to envisage doing this in practice. And also what we discovered was back in school, the time constraints, the workload that they had on them didn't give them the space to think in that critical way. So they said, I want to do some of these approaches. I want to, think about some of this with my pupils, but I have no headspace in the day to even get round to thinking about it. but they were very much keen to do it, but struggling perhaps to be able to do it in practice or even envisaging. I think that's what they clicked when we've had a look at some of the data from the workshops. They said they enjoyed partaking in them because it gave them that opportunity to think about their context, put it in practice, and kind of get a nice sense for what it might mean to actually do this.
Yeah, so just to add to that, we developed a couple of ideas that they did. So they actually got to experience it through their bodies and engage in that critical embodied movement. And they really valued that. It was a bit of a light bulb moment for them, because as I say, they brought to the workshop, they already were used to this notion of critical thinking, but they just didn't know how to do it in a physical education context. And some of the feedback we got from them was they wanted more of that. They really enjoyed it. They were motivated to do it. So there was a kind of an effect there. There was an emotion, if you like, involved in. And a part of it was one of the first face-to-face workshops that they had done after lockdown. So they just really enjoyed being sociable with other people. So being with other people in a room doing this stuff was of value to them, and they really enjoyed it. But they liked, and they kept talking about this idea of having something concrete and tangible to take away. So they had the experience, and they had the vision, and they had the opportunity to discuss, so they could take quite a lot of different things away with them back to school that they really appreciated.
Thank you very much, Shirley. I think that we are running with the time, so I think we can just move on to our last questions about I think it could be interesting just to reflect about, starting from this UNEUropa project, what are the future direction for critical digital health pedagogies in schools? What kind of things we are developing? So Christina, maybe you could explain your innovative approach to digital health.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. Our project has been very rich, and it is very much research-based. So in the future, one of the focus areas, obviously, for us is to kind of map still existing literature and develop future directions based on this literature. We know that we still lack quite a lot of research knowledge in the area, as was already brought up very nicely by Shirley and Emma and Maria and Sarah. For example, understanding the role of digital technologies and how they are entangled with our bodies, with our affects, and the materiality of learning, and how actually we are one with the technologies, and what does this kind of new materialistic post-human understanding mean, and what can it do in developing pedagogies is something that we haven't adequately addressed. This is what we have really learned already. As was pointed out, traditional concepts of digital literacy or media literacy that are more representational and based on language and texts, they are not adequate any longer, because I may be now speaking in a little bit abstract way, but theoretically, there is still much to do that has a clear connection to the pedagogies that we want to develop. So that is one of the outcomes of this project. We have identified gaps in research knowledge, in theory, and even the questions that we ask. We need to develop new research questions. We are now involved in writing several articles for journals on our works. So that is what we will do. Since my own area is not directly linked with PI education, physical education, and teacher education in that area. I let the floor to my dear colleagues to elaborate a little bit more what this can mean for teacher education in physical education. But definitely for me, I'm very interested in drawing on our work when we think about how to teach media literacy and digital media literacy, critical for future teachers in Finland and beyond. But I'll give the floor to more experts in physical education to talk about the implications of our work and the next steps in our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Emma, would you like to explain something about how we can move forward to the policy practice?
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you.
So I guess one of the next steps for us is looking at how those policies are framing both understandings of the digital and understandings of the health context, and looking at how one of the things that I think hasn't been well understood is the potential for the digital to lead to new forms of inequality. And there's not much about that in any of the kind of disparate policies that shape what happens in health education or physical education. So much of what we hear about digital technology is its potential to transform, to enhance people's health. But our critical perspective, of course, is kind of, I guess, casting a lens on some of those policies, both at the national level and European level and beyond. And there are, I think, a lot of assumptions about young people within some of those policies, particularly that they are digital natives. And actually, what we know is that inequalities around digital technology are not just about whether somebody is online or has access to the internet, but all of the things that we've been talking about today in terms of digital literacy, having the knowledge, competencies, experience of navigating through this vast terrain of digital health practices. So that takes us to, I think, some of the points that Christina was articulating really nicely there, that we need at the policy level a much firmer set of guidelines around what digital health literacy might look like. And I think that in some ways responds to some of the teachers' concerns that in this very busy life they have, where they're saturated with requests to attend to all sorts of societal problems, there is a need for stronger guidance, both within teacher education, but also at a policy level. I think that the flip side of that is, in a more positive sense, opportunities for bringing together creative practices, artwork, and really engaging young people continually through this process. There is no set curricula that's going to answer this, because technology will keep changing, and we can't really, by the time we've caught up with it, something new comes along. So I think it is about a set of values and processes. But you know, young people are, and this goes back to Christina's opening point, incredibly good in terms of knowing how to use technology for transformative reasons. They're very clued up in that sense, some more than others. But even the simple example of technologies that we might not think are really useful for health or physical education can be. So something as simple as using Spotify to create a playlist really connects with affect, and can be nicely integrated into technology. So all of the technologies that we use are underpinned by a set of values, a set of policies, some more critical and transformative. They might be feminist perspectives. Others use algorithms that are designed to get us to change our behavior. I think a nice example of that is an app in education that came out called Daughters of the Evolution. And it's an augmented reality app that's used to change how we think about science and how young people learn. So they essentially put the app over textbooks where we see sort of famous men from science and there's an algorithm in that will then show important women from the same era. I think that's a really nice example of how technology can be used in a way that's underpinned by a critical feminist perspective, which changes the whole assemblage around that pedagogical practice. So yeah, I think that co-design perspective that Shirley and Sarah talked about can be something that we just continue to do, but should be integrated and recognised at that policy level.
Thank you so much. Sarah, certainly, would you like to add something to the debate?
Do you want to go, Sarah, or I don't mind?
Just a final.
Sorry, I was just trying to find my unmute button there.
I was just going to say, my mind's now thinking over time as to that idea that you've just given there about that athema, how we could turn that into something within physical education. So my mind's out there at the moment. I suppose the other thing was just to, I see Antonio had asked a question on the chat there, and I was kind of thinking about that as well. And that's this idea about, you know, those teachers whose values don't align with some of these ideas, how do you get them on board? I suppose it's really just to say one of the things that we've done in the workshops and that we're now thinking about in writing the resource is to encourage teachers to do some self-reflection, to think about their own health practices, and to provide them with some critical questions that might get them to think about that differently. And that could be a useful starting point to encourage them to teach about health differently.
Okay, so Sarah, final.
Yeah, and I think in our study, we've looked very much on kind of co-creating ideas working with teachers. And I think a next logical step to develop this further would be to work with teachers and their pupils together, which I think I might have mentioned briefly earlier, and bring young people's voice into this as well. Would be a next logical step. And practically, we're hoping to work on, you know, resources, working with teachers to develop resources, you know, ideas that are tangible to work with and so on, and rolling out these workshops that we've been doing, rolling them out kind of further and wider, would be the next step practically.
Sarah, thank you so much. I know, Christina, if you have to go, please do it. So I think I'm going to review the chat. We only have one question, but I think, Sarah, maybe you can answer this question. I think that in some way we have answered it. If anybody has any other questions, we have 2-3 minutes and we have to say.
What's the question? I can't actually see a question.
How would you suggest to develop critical health thinking in PE teacher whose own values, belief, ontologies related to digital health and the notion of being healthy is not fully aligned with a critical pedagogy type of thinking? So I think this question is something that we already answer, isn't it? Yeah.
I think that the whole idea of co-creation there is important as well, just trying to get those teachers involved and be part of the process and not make them feel that this is something we're telling them to do, that it's coming from them and it's building on what they know, because even those teachers whose values don't necessarily at that point align, they will have experiences and knowledge that we can use and build on. And I think that is really important.
Okay, thank you so much. We don't have any other questions, and it's time to end. So I only want to say thank you very much to all the people attending and spending this whole hour with us. And I would like to thank you all, these excellent international speakers from UK and Finland, Christina. And I think it's a brilliant opportunity to share and to continue our discussion and our development of critical digital health pedagogies. And I think this forum is a good opportunity just to share what we are learning and all the process with other teachers of physical education and researchers. I would like also thank you to Anna, who was in the control of this online, and also David, who is from the University Complutense of Madrid organizing this webinar. So if you have any other questions, you can just write to us through mail, and we will be very happy just to answer you. Thank you so much.